It is my great pleasure to introduce Leigh Bortins, who is the founder of Classical Conversations. And Gutenberg has really appreciated the relationship we've had with CC over the past few years. So I remember when I started going out and doing workshops and things like this, wondering, like, are there other human beings that want to do this thing that we're doing? And I quickly realized that, yes, there are many other human beings that want to do this sort of thing that we're doing. But I had the chance to go out to the first annual CC National Convention conference in April. Was anyone there? Oh, you have to go. You have to go. It's in April. You should definitely go. It's out on the East Coast at the Athletic Village, and Leigh was very gracious. She bought me a drink, and we sat down and hung out with everybody and chatted with me, and I was just amazed at the way that she talked about mathematics. Have any of you ever heard her talk about mathematics? Isn't it awesome? I've never been more excited about mathematics in my entire life. It was so stirring and so interesting the way that you put the pieces together. We're so happy that you're here and are so grateful that you made the trip, Leigh. Thank you so much. Now for more official descriptions, allow me to apply some very meaningful categories. So Leigh Bortins, as many of you know, is a nationally acclaimed educator, perhaps best known for her ability to demystify the fundamental tools of learning. As a teacher, author, and commentator, Leigh is credited with helping to launch the home-centered learning education movement. After earning a degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan, Leigh worked in the aerospace industry before beginning her work as an educator. She holds a doctorate of ministry degree from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Hamilton, Massachusetts. In teaching study skills for 30 years to children and adults, she has written several books, including The Core, The Question, and The Conversation, all those are book titles, a series which explores the classical trivium from a parent's perspective. She has also authored complete K-12 curriculum guides for parents and homeschool tutors across the country, and now all over the world. Leigh is the founder and chief visionary officer for the Classical Conversations Incorporated organization, one which models the home-centered learning approach to empower learners of all ages. She trains facilitators dedicated to duplicating her methods and is thereby transforming education and improving the quality of family and community life. Leigh is currently working on developing a math curriculum that maps the structure of learning K-4 through 12 math from a classical Christian perspective. Leigh's emphasis on the time-tested enjoyment of learning and the fundamentals of education and critical thinking skills grew out of her own experiences in homeschooling her 4 boys with her husband, Robert. They and their children and grandchildren live near Pinehurst, North Carolina. Classical Conversations is a classical education resource used by homeschoolers in all 50 states and 30 foreign countries. CC has more than 125,000 students enrolled in its tutoring programs, which are provided by 2,500 CC communities. Let's go ahead and... So, Leigh's talk this afternoon is titled Big Heads on Little Bodies. Were you ever sure you had taught something to your children only to discover that they hadn't learned a thing? Sounds like some of you may have. It's tough for children to fit into adult expectations, and it's even harder for adults to remember that little bodies have little heads. Leigh used to remind herself of this by saying to her youngest son, "Can you just be 30 years old for a minute?" when she was frustrated with him. She says he learned and started saying to her, "Can you buy this for me before I no longer want it?" Come enjoy more real-life wisdom as Leigh explores ways to bridge knowledge gaps between tutor and student, adults and children. Please welcome Leigh Bortins.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Is it on? Sounds like it is. Well, thank you for being here. You're welcome. Thank you, Elliot. And thank you, Gutenberg. I'll have more to say. And thanks to you guys in a moment. Before I get started, I wanted to make sure I promoted this. A Dad's Guide to Classical Education, written by my son, Robert Bortins, who runs Classical Conversations. And that's it. It's that small. And the subtitle is for dads who don't want to read books, something like that. I don't know. But I want to point out the wisdom of homeschooled children. So he is smart enough to have opened the guide thanking his beautiful wife, April, for homeschooling. And I want to tell you a couple of the chapter titles. So maybe some of you men will get it, or you women will download it for the men you love. But his titles are things like Public School Isn't What It Used to Be, Will Classical Education Screw Up Your Kids? What About Faith? Show Me the Money? What About Sports? But he was really smart, and he ended it with a Who Was That chapter, which was kind of his little bibliography. And so I wanted to read to you who he included in that list, because they are some of your favorites too. So Andrew Kern, Andrew Pudewa, C.S. Lewis, Dorothy Sayers, Aristotle, and me. Didn't know we had such good company, right, Andrew? So a lot of people ask me why I can do what I do, and a few years ago I realized that I am in just such a unique situation. As I got to know more and more of you, and I've heard of your struggles and tried to find ways to, like somebody a minute ago just said to me, bring classical education down to earth. I was trying to think, why can I do what I do? And I just want to give this as my testimony. I grew up in a family that went out of their way to say, well done to me. Cousins, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters. I married a man who loves me like Christ loves the church. All my children, my daughter-in-law and my grandchildren, rise up and call me blessed. And I live in a community that only prays for me and wants the best for me. And I include many of you here in that. And that's what I want for every single person I meet, is to have that kind of a family life. And so I really believe it starts from rejecting the world's idea of so many things that we have to get up and do every day, and turning it upside down and asking the Lord what he would have us do. And so, if nothing else, that tells you a little bit more about me. Now, I want to get on to the topics. So I also want to include in this opening thank you Nancy Piercy. I don't know if a lot of you know, but in our list of tutor materials, The Soul of Science has been there from the very beginning. Challenge B students used to read excerpts of that. It was getting to be a little bit difficult. Times have changed. The kids used to be able to read better books 30 years ago than they could read now. But meanwhile, we changed it to make it a tutor book. And so if you haven't read that book, go ahead, buy it from Nancy, get it signed, or buy it from us. I think it'll give a lot of insight into how classical conversations is morphing for the international community. So a lot of you may or may not know, we're actually in 50 countries, and we're in the middle of translating our domestic curriculum into 5 languages. So we ask you to please pray for that. But anyway, so thank you to Andrew, too, and all that he's done with IEW with us and helping us with our little guys. So, 2 things. I'm getting old. The other day, somebody was doing a Bible study about how we have to dry up, like the mustard seed, and die before we can rise again. And, I looked at her and I said, I'm feeling really dry lately. I'm processing getting older. So, the first time the police came to our home, my older 2 were in the backyard with a bunch of their friends, and they had gathered some liquid nitrogen from a local ice company, and they were trying to figure out which size bottle made the loudest noise. So they had all kinds of various plastic and glass jars in the woods and were blowing things up. Well, I guess a neighbor was worried. And so the police came and they all ran to the basement. And so I said, what's wrong, officer? And he said, ma'am, there's a lot of noise coming from your woods. And I said, oh, well, we homeschool. And it's a science experiment. All right, so homeschooling is not bringing school home. It's a totally different thing, and I want to explore some of those ideas with you over the next hour. Another time, and I need, before I share this story, is remind you that when we first homeschooled back in the 80s, a lot of people didn't let their kids out of the house till 3 o'clock because they were worried about truant officers. You need to remember, our pioneers in homeschooling paid fines and had their children taken from them and put in foster care, and we were in court cases and things like that. So I never had to actually experience that personally, but I did help friends who were dealing with the truant officers get through the situations that they were in. So I want to share another kind of funny story about homeschooling. So this is my son, John, our second born, and one day I looked at him and I said, I think you must be allergic to Tylenol. And he's like, well, Mom, you've been giving me Tylenol all week. So I said, you're not supposed to be able to be allergic to Tylenol when you're a child. So he was, I don't know, 10, 11, 12. And I said, we have to go to the doctor. So on the way to the doctor, I'm all nervous because I'm thinking, all right, he's going to get taken away from me. So the doctor's looking at him, and he's saying, okay, we usually don't see Tylenol reactions on children. That's why we recommend it. And why are you giving him so much Tylenol that he's reacting to it like this? And I just looked at John, and I said, you tell him, because I don't want to get in trouble. And so John raised his head and said, you see this rope burn? Well, I hung myself on the rope swing. So my mom gave me Tylenol because it really still hurts. And then I was on the roof, and I jumped off, and see this swollen ankle? So Mom gave me some more Tylenol to deal with the pain from the swollen ankle. And then there was a bee's nest that was on the shed, and I thought it was fun to throw rocks at it, and so do you see all the stings up and down my arm? So she gave me some more Tylenol. And then I woke up this morning all swollen. And, of course, the doctor looked at me and said, well, stop giving him so much Tylenol. And I was like, of course I won't. I just wanted to verify that that's what it was. It wasn't from the bees or something else that he was all swollen like that. So we need to remember that this is like how our children learn science. This is how our children learn to deal with doctors. This is how they learn to deal with pharmaceuticals and with medicine. There's so much to homeschooling that has nothing to do with cracking a book open. And then in 2014, as our third son, William, was finishing Challenge 4, some of you may remember I started a program that was called Mandala. And 19 students came to live near my husband and I, and actually Mr. Jensen back there, Ruben's brother-in-law, helped me. And we worked with these 19 children and young adults to teach the quadrivium to them. Well, they were great homeschooling kids, and to this day, I'd say half of them I talk to every week, right? Good, strong relationships, and this was back in 2014. But I want to tell you what happened in the first 3 weeks of Mandala. 2 of the boys decided to drive to South Carolina, we live in North Carolina, and returned with illegal fireworks. 1 student did flips on concrete and broke both his ankles, so I was in the hospital with him. Another one, the bunch of the boys were having a jumping contest to see who could jump the highest on top of this little car, and one jumped really high and smashed in the windshield. But we can't ignore the girls. One of them, she left the car in neutral and went into the house, so we had to put it in, the car literally went right into the living room. Okay, so we had to repair the front of the house. And remember, I said I'm still friends with them. But I tell you those stories to remind you to pray for Gutenberg. As academically minded as they are, these are real people that they're going to work with. And as great as the students are, they're testing their wings, a lot of them, for the first time. And so I want you to be sympathetic for them, or with them. Okay, so not only do you not bring school home, I'm also really concerned that that even worse than that is so many homeschoolers, especially in high school, do lone school. So let's not bring school home, let's not do lone school. So I want to explore these specifically ideas with you related to those 2 ideas, as well as learning to not expect little bodies to carry big heads. In other words, I'm generally asked to speak at conferences to talk about what I call Monday problems. You've heard all these amazing, inspirational people, and I couldn't have paid them enough to promote classical conversations. They've all been amazing about explaining our philosophies. But the thing I like to do is to remind us that we do wake up Monday mornings and these kind of things I've just described happen. And yet we still need to not give up. We need to be enthusiastic in our homeschooling. So first I want to tell you a little bit more about me, and then I'm going to give you an exercise. People just think of things about the Bortins that just are not true. I remember David, who's very tall and skinny, came back from Teen Pack. Many of you are familiar with that. And he said, Mom, they all thought because I was a Bortins, I was going to be short, fat, and wear glasses. And a lot of people think we're a lot smarter than we are. We're not. We're just average people. And so I want to share with you that, I'm not a really good baby mom. I did not like it, even though I would have had many, many more, because I love them when they're grown up. But being a baby mom was hard for me. The thing that was really wonderful is my husband loved it. He loved snuggling with them all night long if he needed to. But then they got older, and it turned out my husband's not a very good primary dad. So it turns out, though, I love 2-year-olds. I love their energy. I love their enthusiasm. I don't know what you're talking about when you say they have temper tantrums and those terrible twos. I think they're amazing. And then when they're 4 years old and they can lock the door and make a peanut butter sandwich, I was like, I'm done. Everything else is icing. They're going to be safe, and they're going to have food, right? So I loved that time period. And then it turned out as they got older, we both loved it. So it worked out. But I don't really think it's just, all easy and fun and games for us. And we have to struggle too. Something else that I didn't like is Latin. So let me tell you about Latin in classical conversations. It took a couple of years of going back and forth back in the late 90s to settle on that we really and truly were going to have Latin in the curriculum. I didn't like Latin. I didn't know Latin. My kids didn't like Latin. They didn't know Latin. The mothers who were working with me didn't want to know, why do we have to teach this Latin? Their children didn't want to learn Latin. Nobody wanted to learn Latin. But I read all these great classical books, and they all learned Latin in the classical books. And so wiser heads than ours, and we stayed with it. And year after year, we did our best teaching Latin really poorly. But then all of a sudden, something started to happen. Some of the students started to like it, and even some of the parents started to like it. And we started getting support from other organizations like SCL and ACCS and people that had better experts in Latin. And so we had some mentorship going on. And so eventually we got to the point where we even had students who had web pages to help other CC students with their Latin. And they were charging for tutoring other CC students. And we went from a society where Latin in high school was not an accepted credit in high school and colleges across the United States because they all wanted living languages, to now every university in the United States will take Latin as a high school language credit. You did that. The Society for Classical Learning, ACCS, universities like Gutenberg, that's actually a good name. Gutenberg, New St. Andrews, that's where I got tongue twisted. They all helped us to make a revolutionary change in college admissions. I don't know if you know that. And that's something that you can, hang your hat on and find a lot of documentation on. So here's why I just thought we were teaching Latin. I told the kids, well, now in Henry V, there's that chapter in French that has all the bawdy jokes. If you know Latin, you can read the French and know all the dirty jokes that are in there. Right? I'm trying to come up with anything, because I don't know why we're learning Latin. And then children in high school are going and coming back from trips to Europe or museums or things like that and saying, Mrs. Bortins, I could read the language when I was over there. Right? Because they were recognizing all the Latin roots and the way that the declensions and conjugations work. But then wiser heads prevailed, and we kept listening and learning and being encouraged by many of the kind of folks that are in this room. And one day, I think it might have been Andrew Curran. If not, he was probably just in the room. But somebody said, the reason you learn Latin is because for over 2,000 years, that's been the language of our mother church. And as classicalists, like they say at St. John's College, we want our children to never be excluded from any form of human endeavor, especially the history of our own faith. And so that has become a rallying point for a lot of the parents who don't want to teach Latin, but they're happy to learn how to do it because they recognize that we don't want to be excluded from all the things that the Lord has to share with us. So we don't learn Latin because it's just something to do. We have kind of hidden reasons, right? So whenever I was first discussing this and saying how it was when we began, people were saying, I can't even get credits out of it, right? So now you can get credits, but is that a good reason to study Latin? Some of you shaking your head, no. There's a lot of good reasons to study Latin. So this is what I wanted you to do. I want to give you just 2 minutes. Talk to people who are near you. I don't like lecturing. I like discussion. And I'm going to point, and then you can average out my pointing. But if this side of the room, I guess the first 2 rows, if you could talk about what's the real reason your children study arithmetic. And the next 2 rows, if you could talk what's the real reason you want your children studying debate. And these first 3 rows, what's the reason you want your children to study logic? And the last 2 rows, what's the reason you want your students to study literature? And in the back 2 rows, why do you want your students to study writing and composition? And in these front 2 rows, why do you want them to know the grammar of any subject? So go ahead and talk, and then we'll call out a couple of things. And so I don't want to hear anything about getting, better salaries. So I only get 3 minutes because I only got an hour. All right, so just shout out. I'm not going to pick on someone, so we just go through, but a couple of reasons. Why do we want our children to study arithmetic? Okay, excellent. All right, debate. I should have had Diane's group do debate. Yes, debate. Why do we do debate? Okay, so we can be hospitable with people we disagree with. That is great. All right, who'd I give logic to? In front? Somebody.
Organize our thinking and
Okay, organize our thinking and proofs. Learn to work out our salvation. You said someone back there? I love formal proofs. You belong with the math people. Okay. All right. What did I say for you guys? Literature? In the back there? Anybody? We just had a whole hour and a half from a wonderful Scott Postma telling us why he needed literature. Anybody want to add to what he said? Wrestle with ideas. History palatable. How about even hard times palatable? Yeah. Good. Okay, composition in the back there. Why do we want to teach our children to write?
organize our thoughts and persuade well. Mr. Kulow said that bad ideas well presented are more persuasive than good ideas
Poorly presented, yeah. That your Hitler story. Good. And you guys, what's this thing about grammar? Why?
It's the foundation for everything, right? Like you have to start with grammar to learn anything, which really brings you to that we will never acquire rhetoric or wisdom without grammar, right? And ultimately, it's the bedrock for deeper ideas.
Good. Okay, so I got you on the same page with me. So where I want to go next is more about what my title is about. Are any of you familiar with Sister Miriam Joseph? She wrote a kind of difficult book to read on classical education. I recommend that if you feel like you're past the milk stage to go ahead and get her material. But she had a quote that I try to remember. It's hard. But the parents and teachers tend to overestimate children's experience and underestimate children's abilities. So another way of saying that is we can put, big heads on little bodies. So I'm going to give some examples, and then maybe you could shout out a few more, just a general crowd. So what do we mean about that? So for instance, my 4-year-old, your 4-year-old can make your bed, but you can't just go into the room or just look at him and say, go into your room, make your bed. He doesn't have the experience. He's got the ability, but not the experience. So how does he get that experience? By you coming alongside and making the bed a whole lot of times with them till finally you can say, you need to go in the room and make your bed, because then they have the experience and the ability. So that tends to be where if we're frustrated with our children, we have some sort of expectation. When you're sitting there thinking, I know they can do it, you're probably right. But they don't necessarily know how to do it, and they just need you to be alongside of them a little bit longer. I've had a fun time this past spring watching my 4-year-old grandson Trey in sports. He was playing 4-year-old t-ball, which is hilarious. And what was really so sweet to me, and it was a mixture of parents doing this, is some of the dads were so embarrassed by their children running the wrong way or not even trying to hit or whatever it was, they would go up and cuddle against their son and help them to hit the ball, and then they'd run the bases with them. They knew their kids could play t-ball. They're just 4. They have no coordination. They have no experience. So what was really great is after the 10th week, we're at the 10th week, the very last day, no fathers were needed. Now, they were on the sides cheering, and they were still coaching and throwing the balls and those kind of things. So we know they had the ability. They just had no experience. What about, say, in worship? Think about that one with me. Maybe someone can give me some other examples. I mean, the obvious one is they don't know how to sit still. And you're trying to get them to pay attention through, in our church's case, a 45-minute sermon. I love that they're long, but it's hard on the children. So we end up doing lots of little things with them. We have them stand when they're supposed to stand and sit when they're supposed to sit, because a change in activity helps them to be a little more encouraged in staying there. We say the same liturgy week after week, because whether you're a new Christian that's my age or a new Christian that's 4, there's certain things that you should hear said every single week, at least one time. And so sure enough, our children, they don't even say those things in our church. They shout them, and the parents all smile because you got 100 little kids shouting out the doxology or, the various, the Lord's Prayer and the various things we say all the time. And so what tends to happen is they, sooner than children who don't practice this, don't mind the sermon, don't mind being at the church for as long. They're okay with an hour and 45-minute service. So how do these kind of things, running baseball, learning when to sit and stand and the songs of the church, knowing how to make your bed, how do these things help your children become better at academics? Confidence. Discipline, what else? Habit. Experience. And how about even obedience? Sometimes they don't obey because they don't know what you meant. So they don't know what the follow-through is supposed to be. So let's talk about play. People tend to underestimate how important play is for building academics. Now, I think that's probably not the case for most of you in this room, but let me go over a couple things about that. So maybe if you don't have the words and somebody else is trying to understand our point of view, you can help them. So the beginning of good academics, besides the things that you just said, for me and my children, started with being able to sit still, but also being able to track with your eyes. Look at the Legos instructions, build the Legos, right? That eye tracking for paper to pencil. Things like someone talked about, was it yesterday, maybe you? Children playing and learning how to work out differences at home so that they'll be better at working out differences when they're in some sort of community and having to learn. There's just so many different things that body control, self-control, are what we're trying to teach them. So when you guys said arithmetic, that was great what your answer was, but the reason I always had my children do arithmetic every day was so they had the habit, the liturgy of once a day sitting down for about 10 minutes and putting hand to paper, pencil to hand, eye to tracking, and at their own level worked on whatever math they were working on. We forget that these little things are what help them be successful when it actually matters, and the content is part of the actual curriculum. This is true for, think about how you taught phonics to most of your children. You probably had them nearby or on your lap with some sort of easy reader and some flashcards on the wall and things like that where you went and you sounded out the words sound by sound. There aren't very many homeschooling parents who will sit down with an American document in their middle school child and say, sit next to me. We're going to practice this out sentence by sentence and sometimes word by word. Instead, we throw up our hands and say, oh, it's just too hard. We underestimate their ability and forget they just don't have that experience. The thing that's sad about some of these resources that classicalists will hand to us is we don't have the experience either, do we? So, praise God you have children because it's forcing you to get the experience. And this is when you need to remember that experience with your child probably has nothing to do with their education and everything to do with yours. Because the Lord's not going to let a minute go to waste for all the effort that you've put into this too. And remember, they'll have their children themselves one day, and they'll know how to go through the American documents with them, sentence by sentence and line by line, just like you do what? When you do a good Bible study. Everything we do with Bible studies is a clue to how you should be teaching all the other things that you work on with your children. So if they don't understand how to get from the quadratic equation to the number 11, do what you do with Bible study. Go line by line, word by word, idea by idea, and look it up and show them that's what you have to do too. Right? Because they are able to read hard things and work on higher level math. They're just not experienced enough. And those are two places where we fail in our own, we were failed in our own education. Okay, so I want to go on to a different topic. I've been really fortunate to travel around the world at global home education conferences. My dear friend Heather's here. She was able to go with me to pretty much all of them, right? I think we went to them all together. And I want to share with you something that I learned, and then I have a question for you. So when I first went to Russia and then went to Brazil, and there's maybe other places in between, but I'm going to talk about Russia and Brazil. So our Russian CC leads met us in Brazil, and all these Brazilians were working on getting some legislation passed for homeschooling to be legal in Brazil. And both the Russians that were there and the Brazilians asked me the same questions. And it was this: we need curriculum. We have no curriculum. What are we going to do about curriculum if we're going to do this homeschooling? Well, Russia's so well known for all its classical literature. I'm like, what are you asking me? What do you mean you don't have any curriculum? I don't understand. And so I said to my friend, what do 12-year-old girls read under a tree? Tell them, let's start there. What are those resources? He said, Leigh, we have amazing Russian literature, but the communists took it away from us, and we're not used to reading it. Well, that was interesting. So the Brazilians, the same thing. So then when they were saying that, I was like, okay, I had the Russians in my mind, and so I said to them, what do your little girls read when they're sitting under a tree? And as an American, why I'm picking on little girls, because they just read so much literature when they're like 11, 12 years old. And they said, we've always been an illiterate country. We have none. They don't read. All right. Well, that was about 6 years ago, and that's also when a lot of this tension in the school system started to come to its head. It's not been 1 or 2 years. First, it's been around since whatever Scott said. Back when Dewey and Mann and all those guys were introducing it. But it's been around for a while. And I realized, this is really sad. They've always been illiterate, so they don't have Where the Red Fern Grows in their language, that kind of a book. And they can't read the Brothers Karamazov, which I guess Andrew said it's hard to read, but they don't have, the literature they used to have, and it was stolen from them. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I live in the United States of America where we have it all, and we are giving it away. We are choosing not to read the good literature from our country, because the kids have distractions called movies and video games and those kinds of things. So, with having shared that with you, I wanted to, same topic, but change it just a little bit. So, when I got done kind of processing and met with them the next day, I had better questions for them. I started to explain to them that they did have curriculum, that they were thinking wrongly. They wanted to have, Calvert in a box that showed up with them, right? Something that is American proved to get you credits and get you into college. And so I started listing for them all the resources they had that they were ignoring. So I'm going to start you off with a couple, and then maybe you can add some more. So for instance, I said, don't you have folk tales? Don't you have hymns? Do you not have government documents? What else could I have said to them? Do you have the Bible? Songs and poetry? Cookbooks, oh, love it. The family budget, going over for math and things like that, right? What else? Music. Mm-hmm. And art, photos, and pictures, and ceramics, and sculptures. All right, what else do they have? Yeah, can they walk outside and plant something or look at the stars? Find bugs in the stream. Play. And drama. Right, if you want to add on to that. The Lord has not left a single person without an infinite number of academic resources if they would just open up their eyes and see what's around them. So something that's interesting to me is in 2019, how much time do I have? Yeah, in October of 2019, Robert asked me to give a kind of theme for the speakers that we had the following year at our practicums. And so my theme for them was, What if all the schools closed down? Heather's nodding her head. And then in March, they started to close down. Now, here's the thing I say, and I'm being facetious and I'm not. So if the Lord had come to me that October and had said, Leigh, this is your theme because it's going to happen. 30 years of prayer are going to be answered. We're shutting down all the government schools. But you have to do two things. You have to wear a mask, and you have to stay 6 feet away from anybody that you're near. Can you do it for me, girl? And I would have said, are you kidding? That's so easy compared to shutting down all the government schools. But he didn't ask me, and I've been just mad. So I'm trying to get over being mad. But one of the things we talked about to prepare our speakers that time was to say, all right, what if the schools did just disappear? And so I shared with them one of the stories of a friend of mine who, at just a horrible time in her life, 3 kids, just found out she has cancer, comes home from the doctor's office, tells her husband, and he says, that's great, I'm moving in with my girlfriend. Miserable time. So she comes down to see me the next weekend and tells me what's going on, and she'd been with me by my side in CC for a long time, and she said, I'm going to have to put him in public school. And, I know I can't keep working here, and she was just devastated and wanted to tell me personally, and I said, okay, could you do something for me? Could you just pretend there was no school, and you're still in this horrible situation? Who would you turn to instead? Do you have grandparents? Do you have aunts and uncles or cousins or somebody else, right? Because we always go, what's her answer? Let's go to the government agency. Not the actual resources my family gave, the Lord has given me. And she just looked at me and said, Leigh, you are so mean. And I said, Pam, I will be your friend forever if you go ahead and put him in school. It's not a big deal. I'm so tired of it always being our first answer. So she drove home, and she called me that night. A man from her church called her and said, I just heard what happened to you. Can I please homeschool your kids till you get things sorted out? We are constantly making bad choices because we can't wait upon the Lord and believe that he has all the resources that we need. So we got to help the folks that are too poor or have a bad history to see they have resources that they all can afford. But we also need to let them know you have teachers everywhere, right? So this elderly man at our church rose up. So let's think about our circle of potential, or concentric circles of potential teachers. So the first one is that there are people who are autodidactic, could live in a cave and come out knowing calculus, right? They're a soul, a mind unto themselves. Very rare, but they're there. So you could rely only on yourself. Fortunately, most of us are born into families. So our first teachers are our families, the siblings and the parents and the extended family, right? But when we're talking about schooling, do we think of them first? Not always. Sometimes we think we have to do it all, and we forget we have these other resources. Then if you go beyond the family, and I'm thinking kind of like the way a child would think, they can walk out their door and there's neighbors. Right? So those are people they can call on. I was going to be a history major, and the summer before my senior year of high school, I was at my friend's house, and she was taking too long to put on her makeup, and I was getting anxious. And so I walked outside to talk to her father, and he was out there rebuilding a World War II airplane, and I went and became an aerospace engineer. That one person, that one summer, because he let me keep coming back and work on it with him, right? Don't neglect your neighbors. And then even besides your neighbors, who you might be able to walk down the street, maybe some of you shop. So there's tradesmen and artisans and nonprofits all around you that have people that can teach things. Have any of you had this experience where your child is just really curious and other adults don't want to be with them? No, they love helping your kids if they're curious. So you have tradesmen and artisans. And then I'm putting the church after that, because hopefully all those people are in a church, if not your church. right? And then we have, in the church, you have a lot of leadership and scholasticism, hopefully, where people are trying to understand Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic and Latin and the Bible and the various theologies. And they go to seminaries, and they're interested in expanding their own education. And praise God for your pastors that every single Sunday, they give you a 1 hour at least lesson where you can teach your children to take notes. And you don't have to do a thing, right? This is why the church is going to prevail, is because we love the Lord with our hearts and our souls and our bodies and our mind, and we show that by showing up on Sunday and listening and paying attention. And our children, whether they're homeschooled or not, see you doing that and know that your parents value learning, right? So we go to our church, and that's another circle of people to help us in our educating our children. And then beyond that, I'm going to say the college. And the reason I like the word college is because it comes from the idea of colleagues. So whether your children's colleagues are in classical conversations, or you are in a master's program, or you are attending a university yourself, or maybe your older children are at Gutenberg, you're looking for people who aren't as random as the community you were placed in, but people who are actually trying to learn the same things you want to learn, encourage you in those things, and provide additional content and suggestions and resources. Does that make sense? Do we need public schools to find teachers? We don't. They're everywhere. But I don't think we're always very good at helping people not bring school home. And then homeschooling through COVID has not turned out to be too great in the sense of there's so much lone schooling going on, right, where the kids are just in front of a machine and don't really have a community. Okay, so is it time? Do any of you want to suggest some resources that you've appreciated that maybe I didn't list that we can add to that set of concentric circles? What about like travel? What are some global institutions maybe? I didn't even mention any of those, did I? Yeah, there's missionary trips. Mm-hmm. Parks. Okay, good. All right, see, this has just been great, all these inspirational speakers, because they're giving us the inspiration and the attitude and the reasons to flip education on its head, but we have to go home and act it out. And so I want you to see the resources that you have. Okay, so let me ask you another question. How do we teach children to look up? Technology has made it so we've lost community communication. I don't know if any of you have thought about how severe it is. You know, we'll talk about the student as an individual, but we don't hear often people talking about in community. So a story I want to share with you is one day, they were in college, so I took my third son, William, and one of his good friends, Christopher Blackburn, and we all had a lot of academics to do, and so I said, let's go to the beach and read our books there. And so while we were having lunch at a table, I was telling them, because we all had our phones with us. We did, me too. And I said, you don't understand how much loss of communication you guys are missing just because you use these machines. You know, I can't tell when you're on it. Are you talking to someone? Are you reading a book? Are you looking at pornography? I have no idea what you're doing with this thing in your hand because it's so private. Oh, Mom, you're just old-fashioned. You want to control everything. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, they had all these things they had to say to me. So then the machines went away because lunch arrived, and then we talked like people talk. And then lunch was cleared, and we brought out all our books. One by one, the 3 or 4 waitresses that were in the restaurant came to us and said, oh, why are you studying Latin? Why are you reading your Bible? What church do you go to? Right? Why are you doing math? I don't see people doing math here very often. The resources in front of us, we're communicating the things we love. And that little box doesn't tell anybody anything about what you love and know. Right? But it does help you to look down, and it does help you to do things as an individual. So what can we do to help our kids just look up more? And before you answer, I want to give you one more definition of that. To whom are they looking up to, as well as to what are they looking up to? I love Nancy Wilson and all of her books, and she's the one that reminds me, year after year with those boys, I have 4 of them, that there's a reason that sons become taller than their mothers. Because if their mother can't look up to them, who else will? And the Lord makes it so we physically have to look up to them. Right? We're forced to, because it's so important. So what are some things we can do to help our children look up? just do it. What? Set boundaries on what?
When you're going to look at the box.
Okay, so in other words, almost from a negative perspective, some of what they can't do, so they have to go. Yeah, my mom always said the best thing for the 4 of us was to be bored, because then you aren't bored. You go find something to do, right? By example, what do you mean? Give me some examples. Good. You would say?
Ask them about their passions and dreams.
Passions and dreams. Yeah, some of them might say, I don't have any, Mom. Can I go back to my machine? Yes, it takes some work and some practice. So Mary, sharing your own passions and dreams and demonstrating them too.
I am playing video games with my kids now, but that trade-off, I play with them, and now they play with me.
That's fun.
I had to step into that to get them to step into me.
Yeah. Yeah, so we need to sometimes enjoy their interests too to help that. Yes? Read a book. Yeah, and lay on the bed with them and hold it in the air. So look it up and read it that way. So, because, it is starting with us and the examples. How many of us play Miss Mary Mac or do spider webs with strings or do hopscotch or throw the ball around? Like, we've forgotten how to play and to go outside and to enjoy the things that are out there. So I love that you said, be the example. And one to add in here is please speak well of their pastor. Don't let your kids ever think you don't think well, that they're not the greatest person on the face of the earth. Because every Sunday they stand in front of you and say, may the meditations of my mouth, and then go on with these scriptures, and you're looking at God speaking right at you. Teach them to value and respect the people that are teaching over them. And then I would add for you CCers, always say wonderful things about the directors and the tutors, right? Because you want them to enjoy doing what they're doing, and part of that is just showing them that you enjoy it and appreciate it too. I mean, really what I'm trying to say is how do we get our children to be like Samwise Gamgee and in the middle of, oh, happy monster COVID, look up and know this too will pass and the stars will be in their heavens. And that there's things that are much more stable than anything right in front of us right now, right? So that's one of the things we're trying to do. And then, I got time for one last question. How can we tailor academics to both express our love for the individual in front of us, as well as the challenge of rigorous adult-level thinking that we're trying to pull them to over a course of years? So I get that question all the time. Christian, where are you, girl? You just asked me last night. It's a perennial problem because when you're helping tutor a child, especially if they're not your child, you only have so much time with them, and you're trying to figure out how can I help you adapt this information so that it's meaningful and significant. And then a lot of our parents aren't practiced at doing that, and they very much want to follow guides or curriculum. Instead of saying, oh, this guide or this curriculum has a really lofty, wonderful goal, what steps do we need to do to head that way? Right? So that you're never giving up on the goal and the expectation, but you're recognizing the size steps you need to take for that child in front of you. That takes the wisdom that we may not even have with our own children. That might be something the Lord blesses us with our grandbabies, right? Because the one thing is, I say this all the time, we have never had this day with these children at this age with these activities. So you're going to do it badly. You're going to fail at it. But you want to know that that's okay, right? Because who needs to call on the Holy Spirit if you do it right every day? Right? So we need to ask him how to help tailor the curriculum and yet not lose sight of these children being made in his image and having the ability to do much more than they know that they can do. So I wanted to introduce you to somebody that I think probably a lot of you know, but Benjamin Zander. Is that name familiar to any of you? You might want to write it down and watch his videos. I have no idea what his worldview is, but his pedagogy is amazing. He says when it comes to this whole idea of success and failure and where people are going to get in their education, I'm going to quote it, "I settled on a game called I am a contribution. Unlike success and failure, contribution has no other side. It's not arrived at by comparison." So every time your children make that contribution, or you say well done to them, to their own progress, teach them every time another adult or sibling or child makes a contribution to their well-being and their progress, to say thank you, right? That we're not comparing one another because none of us have the exact same talent, skills, times, resources. But we do want them to always just aim for a little bit better, and the way they do that is serving and contributing and adding to the conversation. So I recommend that Benjamin Zander has lots of wonderful videos. He's a music teacher. Okay, so I'm nearing the end, and I will end with a confusing note page. So, in the Bible, we are told a lot of times that we are to build. And I just did a cursory look this morning, and it says to build an ark, and to build a city, and to build a family, build altars, build temples, build houses, build vineyards, build knowledge. It goes on and on in the scriptures. I think one of the things that can help us stop bringing school home and stop having lone school, though you want some quiet time, but you know what I mean, when the kid is doing everything by themselves, is to replace the idea of homeschooling with the idea that we're building. We're building the body of Christ. We're building a house for his name. Those are all things in the scriptures. Anthony Esselin has spoken to that a lot in his recent articles and books. And so if you want to just examine that idea more, you can't go wrong reading Anthony Esselin. But I'm really tired of Christians not knowing how to be Christians in our culture. You know, we make movies that are bad or have Christian Bible verses thrown into the plot. Our music's not great. Some of the things that Elliot spoke to on the night when he introduced this conference. And here's one thing that I think we're doing differently. Everyone in this room has the opportunity to build an academy, a Christian academy. We can reject the entire world's idea of what this looks like. We can work together with one another. And when I talk about an academy, I mean an academy without walls that focuses on supporting the parent so they can raise their children, their sons and daughters, into brothers and sisters in Christ. That would be our first way of supporting each other. And it will never succeed if we insist on including idolatrous ideas about people. Right? And so a lot of our speakers have given you some ideas about idolatry that we have in our current educational system. So this is true homeschooling. As you build your marriage and your family and your household and your gardens and your neighborhood and your businesses and your skill set and your knowledge set and your love of the arts, keep your children around your ankles and nearby and let them build with you. And that'll be homeschooling at its best. And remember, unless the Lord builds the house, the builder's labor is in vain. Thank you.